The ravages of too much screen time. For me, the axe fell when I brought home my first report card. In the 6th grade, my TV viewing time was curtailed to a single hour a day. Now, this was before the internet. It's now been 3 decades since mobile phones went mainstream, nearly 2 since the advent of the tablet and the smartphone. And what have we got? Many teachers and psychiatrists link long hours of scrolling and exposure to violent, pornographic images, cyberbullying, anxiety, and sleep deprivation among a generation whose attention span has shrunk. We'll ask about a panel that's just submitted recommendations to France's president, starting with a ban on smartphones for youth under 13. What's the right measure in a connected world? What responsibility for parents, teachers, the tech giants whose entire business model rests on keeping us on our screens as long as possible? Can the curbs be enforced? After all, for all of my own parents' good intentions, I did manage to skirt that 1 hour a day rule on TV watching. Today in the France 24 debate, how to regulate screen time for young people. With us from the French city of Montpellier, child psychiatrist, and Lise Barthélémy, member of the Collective Against Overexposure to Screens. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
Former high school teacher, today associate professor of English at the Sorbonne University, Gabriel Latanzio. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bernard Benamou, Secretary General of the Institute of Digital Sovereignty think tank. I guess you could call it an advocacy group for European tech.
Exactly. That's a way to see it, and that's precisely what we try to promote a third way for Europe between China and the US.
All right, we'll see how that falls when it comes to regulating all of this. From Columbus, Ohio, therapist Sarah Hayes of Save Point Behavioral Health, whose focus is a lot on geeks and gamers, as you put it. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Hi.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. And before we delve into the report's recommendations, let the overwhelmed parent who's never parked their child before a cartoon cast the first stone. James Vazina has more.
The question is, are you willing to stop your children from spending their day in front of screens?
What's crazy about it is that on one side I agree, but my daughter has a phone.
I think that social media especially should be limited. We should know what they're doing on it, but without necessarily bringing in a ban.
Yet that's the conclusion of the study that's been carried out for President Emmanuel Macron. No phones before the age of 11, no smartphones until 13, and no social media for under 15s.
I think that for social media, it'll be complicated because we learn a lot through it.
On one hand, I think they're right, but sometimes it's fun to pass the time. We learn, we laugh.
Dozens of towns in France have trialled no screen periods, and children recognise that the 10-day test isn't easy.
I used to be on screens all evening. Now I do my homework and then I play.
I'm reading more, spending more time outside.
Teachers noticed there was less tension among children.
If there's an argument the day before, it isn't aggravated via their phones in the evening.
And parents picked up on changes too.
Our little one forgets to go to the toilet because she's so glued to her television. We don't have that problem anymore.
56 minutes a day for 2-year-olds, over 3 hours for teenagers. An average screen time that experts say affects children's health, including their ability to concentrate.
56 minutes a day for 2-year-olds? What does that tell you, Gabriel Latanzio?
It's a lot. So I remember when I was teaching high schoolers, I felt myself that I was quite the technophile. And I remember talking to my high school students, asking them how much time they spent on their cell phones. And myself, I would spend 3.5 hours, 4 hours maybe, and they showed me their phones. And the answers I got went from 6 hours a day to 8 hours a day. When I saw that, I realized that something was wrong for sure.
When did you first feel that something was wrong?
I've been teaching for a bit more than 15 years now, and I do see a few trends that worry me. So you see something happening when it comes to how tired they might be in the morning. because they've been on their phone under their blanket. I remember being a 15-year-old listening to the radio, until midnight or something, but they would use their phone until very much, the worst time you can imagine. Their attention is not so good. I think there's more demand for, the material we use in class to be more fun, which I think is good and valid to some extent. They are not so willing to engage with texts. They might be more willing to engage with video, but if they are willing to engage with video, it will not be just any video. It has to be short and quick. I am very surprised now. I teach at the Sorbonne. I teach adults, and you would be surprised. Maybe not the majority, but a good number of young adults in France say they don't watch movies, for instance. And it's actually a surprise for them when I tell them, look, if you want to know about American history, which is what I do, I say, watch Spielberg's Lincoln, etc. and so on. And they say, oh, it was such a long movie, etc. and so on. It might be a pretty long movie, although I enjoyed it. But yeah, no, sure. So quality, attention time, tiredness, there's all that.
Lise Barthélémy, what's the trend that you've observed?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. It just cut.
What's the trend that over the years you've observed when it comes to attention span among young people?
Sorry, it got to the children. The impact, you mean?
The attention span, how much they pay attention. And all right, we're going to try to reconnect and try to fix the line with Montpellier. Apologies for that. How about you, Sarah Hayes? Tell us, have you noticed a trend over the years?
A trend of
shortening attention spans with lengthening screen time.
So actually, I think that shows more of a trend of consumption than a trend of physical symptom. The things that children enjoy, think of it like reading a short segment of a book, getting caught into a good story and reading a long segment of a book. It's the same as watching a short video versus getting into and watching a long movie like Lincoln.
Go ahead. We're listening, Sarah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. In my work at Take This, we do a lot of outreach and workshops and education around video games and screens, and how there's a lot of research out there that actually shows that depending on the games or the content they're consuming, it might actually help with a variety of cognitive experiences and skills. So
what you're saying is that longer screen time is not necessarily a problem?
Yes, I think that there's a big role that families can play, that parents can play in helping regulate, just like any other activity. Like homework should happen before play, right? Theoretically. So homework should happen before screen time, just like that sweet child said on the video. I think that that's important to pay attention to, that there's balance between screen time and other things we do, but regulating it on a broad scale might not be the answer.
So you're against, for instance, that we're going to talk about in a moment, this idea of banning smartphones for children under 13?
I think that's a question mark. I don't think a blanket ban is as effective, or it's an extreme response in my perspective compared to, like, not every child should have a cell phone, but sometimes there's circumstances that make it logical to have a cell phone. Like if a child has lots of afternoon activities and a parent is trying to coordinate and keep track of them, it might make a lot of sense for them to have a cell phone. But
what about in that case a dumb phone? Like an old Nokia.
A dumb phone might be an answer. That is a good answer, and that's the point I'm trying to make, is that it's contextual. I think it's so subjective that having a blanket ban might not be the answer as much as having context and parental guidance around, like, I think my child is at an appropriate developmental point to have a cell phone, rather than having a blanket legislation that says smartphones are not okay, when there's research out there that contradicts that. There's a lot of benefits.
All right, so you hear there, Bernard Benamou, an edict from on high is not the way to go when it comes to these issues.
I'm not surprised that our American friend is saying that regulation is a bad thing. We are very famous in Europe for sometimes over-regulating. But in that matter, I consider that there are so many studies showing that for the very young kids who are getting addicted to smartphones, from the age of 2 to the age of 9. Indeed, it's difficult to restrict or to have that blanket ban that we were talking about. But indeed, at this moment, we have so many proof that it's dangerous for their cognitive development, and maybe our guest will say that too. But it's dangerous. There is what we call in our field in education the TikTok syndrome, meaning that we are making kids addict or pushing them to addiction for that kind of short videos. And we've seen just a few days ago, it was after the report was made, that TikTok was about to launch in Europe TikTok Lite.
Yeah, TikTok Lite, where you would get reward
for addiction
program for staying on longer.
That's exactly the logic of the dealer. You are paying for addiction. At first, the first dose is free, and then you are rewarding the person who is a good customer. That's exactly what we don't want, and that's interesting to see that the European Union has been conducting a study about that, and TikTok decided to back down. So basically, it's, do we want to get even deeper in addiction for those kids who will be unable to have social relationships? I would be very interested in knowing what our psychiatrists say.
Lise
about
Barthélémy, your thoughts on this?
I do think that a regulation has to be with children and with their cell phone, and especially with smartphone, because anyway, with most of the children there is an addiction, and between going out doing some sport and having a look on few things on their smartphone, the children will choose the smartphone, and when they have too much time on it, they cannot do a good development, and this is a real problem for babies, children, and teenagers.
Yeah, we had a report come out last fall, which kids entering the sixth grade, so 12-year-olds, Gabrielle Latenzio, asked simple math questions. One of them was, how many quarter hours are there in 3/4 of an hour? And half of them got the answer wrong.
Right.
And can you blame that on phones and screens, or is that an exaggeration?
Well, it's the result of collective decisions made by adults. And when it comes to the digital world, we certainly have not been making decisions. We've created a world that's been in the hands of those who use them, but we have not decided to have any sort of control over it. Now, I'll be honest, I had a computer in my room when I was like 3 because my parents both worked in computer science. So I do think screens can make you smarter. And I do think that making it illegal entirely is a bad reform. And I'm all for it. And I'll tell you why I think I'm all for it. I'm all for it because it will get the ball rolling. We just need to do something. Yeah. It's not something I would have said 10, 20 years ago when I was younger. Having taught with a number of high schoolers, I can tell you we need to do something. This measure will be stupid, it will be bad, but when we undo it, we will have no choice but to make it better. Because there's no way you can convince anyone that this is not something adults should do something about.
All right, let's go over some of the recommendations in the report. Just some of the big ones here. No screens before the age of 3. Smartphone ban for youths under the age of 13. Economic actors, that is, the big tech companies, must provide an absence of health risk proof. The right to parental settings when you have a new website or a new app. Regulation of screens for schooling and education among teenagers on the health risks of screens. Bernard Benamou, if you're to pick and choose, what's the most important of those recommendations, the low-hanging fruit that they should do now?
Oh, obviously for under 3. The fact that the youngest kids don't have interactions with the physical world is dangerous for their cognitive development. That has been proven many times. So for me, the low-hanging fruit, to pick your expression, is that. But obviously, for social networks, which are heavily used and can be a harassment tool in schools, I guess there is something to do. And we were with a group working for the États généraux de l'information, with the group, the thinking group of the future of information, and decided by President Macron. And I was advocating for something that could certainly scare our American friends, but maybe not today, a total ban on TikTok. Because obviously the Chinese are not only having an impact in terms of addiction, but also an interference tool, an spying tool, that is too dangerous not to be regarded as something that we have to stop at some moment. The TikTok Lite was stopped. I guess next will be TikTok itself, which is obviously the one with the most traction among kids and young adults these days. So for me, it's a matter of not being foolish about the future of our kids and of our education system, which can be heavily impacted by those technologies.
Last week, as we were saying, TikTok, which is owned by China's ByteDance, bowing to pressure from the European Commission, suspending a rewards program on the spin-off TikTok Lite, as mentioned by Bernard here, in France and Spain, this after the threat of a suspension by Brussels. Turns out that while TikTok Lite's targeting Europe's youth, since last year, Chinese authorities have set a 60-minute default time limit per day for users under 18. At times, under certain conditions, it is slightly extendable. But still, what does that tell you, Sarah Hayes? And do you agree about this idea that some of these social media are addictive and some of these programs are addictive?
Thank you for calling back to that, because I was about to if you didn't. I would love to see if someone has something contradicting this, but to my knowledge, there is no evidence that media itself is addicting, but rather it serves a function. There's a core issue here that we're not discussing at all, which is the mental health behind what's happening. And usually it's inverted to the way that we're discussing it. It's not that screen time causes mental health problems. That's untrue. The truth is mental health problems might exist. Bullying exists in schools without screens. Like, everyone is existing in the physical world, but at the same time, screens are all around us. We're on screens right now, which is amazing. It gives us this connectivity in all of these other contexts. But can people use it problematically? Yes. Is it something that is used as a coping tool to cover up something else?
But Sarah,
yes.
isn't this, if you replace the words social media and have the same, isn't that the argument of the gun lobby, that it's not the guns that kill people, but it's mental health problems?
I don't think that there's I don't know that there's a direct parallel there. However, regulations can be helpful, like having an application to make sure that someone has a sound experience of mind before they are able to purchase a gun. However, at the same time, that's not the same as teens using a mobile device that are literally all around them. Like was stated in the very beginning of this segment, kids are going to find a way around this stuff. If parents have phones or tablets, they're going to get onto them. When computers are around in the house, they're going to figure out how to use them. They're going to be advancing in this technology, whether we like it or not. So should there be some form of management of children's use? Yes. Do I think that any of us need screens to survive, to develop? Absolutely not. But are there benefits? Yes. Are there dangers? Absolutely. But also, parents should be aware of the social media apps that their children are using. Is TikTok a political debate? Absolutely. And not something I'm going to broach into, other than acknowledging, like, yes, there are some things politically to pay attention to, and what apps should be present in which countries. Absolutely a legislative decision to make. But parents and what's allowed in schools and such should be, in my opinion, the regulators of what apps are my children using? What are they watching? What are they looking at? What movies are they watching? Is a similar analogy in parallel that we've had in our growing up, where like my parents wouldn't let me watch rated R movies until I was old enough to watch them per the regulations there. But I could have if they wanted me to. That was their decision. They followed that on their choice. But that's my parents' choice. And I respected their choice as a child because they taught me about it. They explained to me why being in certain contexts or using certain whatever was bad and good. And so I followed that guidance rather than having a blanket statement.
Lise Barthélémy, do you agree?
Well, I do think that there is a real addiction with using too much screen. And about the commission, I think that it's very important to stop giving screens to children before 3 and to give a smartphone before 13. It can be very dangerous, and children, teenagers, they cannot regulate by themselves. No. And I must say, it's very confusing for the parents, for the family, because since yesterday, everything was possible, or there was no things said to regulate screens, and the parents were lost. And now that this commission did this huge work, and we really do thank them for this big work, it will be clearer for the family to regulate and to be convinced that they have to be with their children and to stop giving too much screen.
So, Lise, based on your experience, can you break it down for us? At what age should there be up until what age should there be a blanket ban on screens? The recommendation here is 3 years old. At what age should kids be allowed to have a smartphone? Your thoughts on this?
What we think with our collective cause is to allow a teenager to have a smartphone with 15, because we think that before that they don't need any cell phone, really. They have to develop their mind to find solution, to ask help for people if they have a problem, and they have to discuss with their parents to find the way to to do without cell phone. And after 15, they can have a smartphone, but they have to be accompanied by their parents to see, as said before, what they can use, what they can watch, and what is dangerous, and if there is bullying, things like that. So the main word for me is 15 years old, and the parents to accompany and to help their children to use it.
Gabriel Attendio.
Right. So on the question on whether or not there is literature about screens causing addictions and mental health issues, etc., and so on.
Because some people had said that because screens are so recent in scientific terms, we don't yet know.
Just to answer that, one of the last books I read is called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It came out 2 months ago. He's a social psychologist. Feel free to make the case it's bad literature, but it exists. That point is made. The general observation is we see problem with bulimia, anorexia. We see people who kill themselves. We see more interpersonal violence between boys, etc., and so on. We do see a number of statistics that are very worrisome for those born after 2000, or actually for those born after 1990. So that literature exists. But I'll tell you one more thing, François. It's not so much that, in my opinion, screens cause violence. I've played GTA, and I'm as peaceful as anyone can be. But I'm telling you that violence happens through screens. So I'm not looking at the causality between screens and violence. I am telling you...
Have we gotten better in 20 years at detecting cyberbullying, for instance?
But it's not just cyberbullying. Look, François, this is first-hand witness here talking. I have seen high schoolers, where I taught in Les Lilas, kill each other. And it's not because of screens.
In the suburbs of Paris.
Yes, in 2008, 2019, 2021. And I've denounced it very vehemently, and I will keep doing so forever. At one point in the story of each of those killings, kids talk to each other online. Yeah. And so it's a moment in a story of dramas. So I'm not just telling you, look, this might cause anxiety, etc., and so on. That point has been made. My point is, as someone who worked with kids, I have seen how these devices have created tragedies.
The authors of the report were clear to say that you can't blame violence on, and these are people calling for regulation, you can't blame the violence on screens.
Sure, you can't blame Tarantino, you can't blame video games. I agree with that. I mean, I'm a fan of those. But the question is, how far do we go when we say it's down to parents or it's down to kids? I'm not that hands-off. I do think we need to make decisions, collective decisions.
So does Sarah Hayes have a point, Bernard Benamou, when she talks about the fact that TikTok is political? After all, when you hear Gabrielle talk about the anxieties, the how do I look, the bulimia, the anorexia issues, and you think Instagram, well, it's not Chinese, it's American.
It's American, yes.
Is it, why just TikTok?
No, it's different because when it's about big tech in the US, we are in a position to negotiate.
Are we really? Mark Zuckerberg has
I
outsized power on the board of Meta. He calls all the shots.
I agree with
Same
you.
with
It's
Elon
difficult,
Musk.
but we have tools. DMA, DSA, the regulations which are about to be implemented now are powerful tools. And they can be, like GDPR for protection of data or privacy, they can have an impact on the structure of those companies. But with China, the difference is they have a political agenda, which is directly against democracies. Try to find content against China on TikTok, and I wish you luck. So at this moment, and try to find content against Russia, and you will find very few. So at this time, they have a political agenda. It's a different topic, I agree. Let's talk about...
But hang on. On Tuesday, the European Commission opened an inquiry against Meta because of disinformation campaigns.
Agreed. But
from
I don't consider
the two
Meta
aforementioned
to be
countries.
complicit to those disinformation campaigns. In a way, they are doing very few against it because their revenues, their advertising revenues, come from radical and polarizing content. That's true.
All right,
but
so they're not enabling it, but at the same time, they're making money off of it.
They are benefiting from it. That's true. But for China, it's very interesting because we talk about TikTok. TikTok in China has another name. It's another company. It's the same group, but another company called Douyin. And there, it's limited at 40 minutes a day.
Crazy.
So basically, and it's about education, science, management. It's not about entertaining the kids. So in a way, they are selling us a product that they know can be addictive, and they want it to be highly addictive for people to use it several hours a day. And for them, no. That's where I see a kind of hypocrisy. And at this moment, I consider that there is a risk for polarizing opinion, for election campaigns. 4 billion citizens are going to elections this year alone. So basically, are we allowing that to be spread, especially on kids who are basically fragile about convictions, about politics, and we see that today with the radicalization of all the political movements. Do we want that to happen?
Lise Barthélémy, is the problem social media or is it just screens in general?
Both.
I would say both, actually, because when they are with the screen, they don't think properly and they don't do what they are supposed to do their proper development. And in the other way, what they see will influence them to think or to do things that could be terrible and, as I said before, tragic. So both are a problem, really.
Now, here in France, we're a nation that loves to pile on the homework. Will adults practice what they preach? Since the pandemic, teachers have stuck with the app Pronote for handing out assignments. It can be an issue, argues the co-chair of the Commission on Exposure to Screens to Children, the one that submitted that report on Tuesday to the French president.
It's the right to disconnection, which we give to adults in the workplace, yet not to children in schools. This means that children can get notifications at all times about homework they need to finish, or marks that have been uploaded on Pronote and so on. So they check them compulsively at night or when they wake up. So we need to give the right of disconnection to children as well.
Gabriel Latanzio, is that something easy to correct?
No, it's not, but it goes both ways.
Why is it not easy to correct?
No, it's about self-discipline, I guess. Look, as long as you have emails, you can either use it or not. You'll have teachers, and they should not use WhatsApp with their students, which is really a big mistake, and it's against the rules. But no, it goes the other way around. Just I don't know if it's fun, but to me that was very telling. I gave an assignment last week about American history, and I had an email that was 2 pages long from a student who was telling me, I didn't understand quite well how the Democratic Party went from being the party of secessionists to become the party of Barack Obama. Can you explain that again? And then another question about FDR or Teddy Roosevelt, I can't remember. Basically, I had to do my whole seminar all over again through email. And I do get those emails again. So it goes both ways. Sometimes you have students using technology. No, of course not. Of course not. No. I try to have a life. I would spend my time playing Overwatch at night than answer my students' emails. But yeah, sure, screens are a problem in that regard as well, of course.
Indeed.
And does that anecdote speak to a difficulty in managing our time.
Yeah, at least I don't think the solution can come from self-discipline. I don't know. Like if I told my mother, just don't use TikTok for 45 minutes, oh my God, she would not respect that limit. She would hate China. She would absolutely need more time to spend on TikTok. Same with kids, even more true for kids. Same for myself. We need rules. We need rules. How do we make them happen, When it comes to addictions, what do we do? Do we make it pricier? That's the strategy with cigarettes, right? It's not about money in that case. It's going to be about, what we program into the machines.
What we're seeing, Sarah Hayes, is that the big companies that are making money off of the internet, because at the end of the day, a lot of the fact that there is a lack of regulations about the fact that it's big business, they're doing things like favoring, pushing online gaming on a younger and younger audience. Isn't there, again, it's the question of the reason why there's a light touch on regulation isn't because of the children's well-being, but because there's money to be made.
Indeed.
Well, I think honestly, it would be very silly for businesses to not make what they're trying to push appealing. That's the whole model of running a business. You want to make money, of course. And that's part of why screens are such a hot debate, because we find them enticing. They are cognitively enticing. I would encourage using the word enticing instead of addicting, because yes, they're enticing. Yes, they pull us in. They are engaging. They light up so many brain centers that show enjoyment and attention. However, at the same time, things like online games have a lot of benefits too. They can help with hand-eye coordination. They can help with mental acuity. They can help with memory, and they can offer social context. There's a lot of benefits that research shows. But I would also encourage with this sort of thing, like I want to call back to the part about regulating and thinking about like that book, for example, The Anxious Generation. I have to call out. I'm so sorry. I want to challenge that, much like when I was in my doctoral program or whenever I do research, we use language around like association. It's a correlation, not causation. Screens don't cause addiction, that sort of thing.
Okay, how do you explain then how do you explain the fact that students are, and I've spoken to many professors who say this, are much more anxious than they were 20 years ago? Why?
And ADD.
Well, I think and as a person with ADHD, I can say that more people are being diagnosed. It doesn't mean it didn't exist in the past. We're just recognizing it better and more able to diagnose it. But ultimately, students are more anxious for a myriad of reasons. There's so much going on in the world. There's constant war. Like, okay, as a millennial, I've grown up in how many wars? We're in an economic state that's worse than the Great Depression here in the US. There's like, to think of who could be our next president is enough to make me want to go visit another country. So like the anxiety levels are caused by so many things. We cannot point directly
so many
to
things
screens
that are on our smartphones.
Well, sure, but they're still out there whether the smartphones are there or not. Also, parents are anxious because they're consuming the news and information. So of course they're going to be anxious, and their kids are sitting there watching them be anxious and wonder why. So whether or not they have the screens, they're still going to get this information. The segment before this one was about the war on Gaza. And of course, that's going to be anxiety provoking because it's scary, because people are dying, because awful things are happening in this world. So of course, there's more anxiety than 20 years ago because there's more world problems. Things
there
are more
world problems than 20 years ago, Bernard Benamou?
I guess there are geopolitics crisis and many other things. But the problem is, and we have seen that, and we have studied that, the attention span is obviously at risk with those tools. And I was mentioning the cognitive development of kids and the fact that things that could have been experienced outside of the screen are not. And for example, geospatial abilities are not the same with kids spending heavily time on those screens. Saying that those services which have been attacked, including at the US Congress for Instagram that you were mentioning, for having dangerous effects on kids and especially girls, about anorexia, about suicide, and so on. Imagining that those services are completely guilt-free about the effect, imagining that there is no intention that could be derived from...
Because it's unfiltered.
Exactly. Yeah. And the fact that kids access porn at age unimaginable for our generation, between 8 and 8 and 9 in average now, and many other things. The fact is, we have been lazy in terms of noticing the risks. And look, we were mentioning the risk about guns, but look how long it took for tobacco industry to admit the risk. Some don't even admit it today, decades after they were launching their products.
Lise Barthélémy, when you think about the cognitive, the way our brain is affected by these social media, are humans changing because of screens?
Indeed, they do.
I wouldn't say that. I would say that you were just speaking about anxiety and and then depression. I do think that brain needs, since ever, to have breaks. It needs not to be stimulated all the time. And the problem with other exposure to screens is that they are advertising, and they are how could I say that? They are thinking and all the time, and they cannot stay stable with their brain. And I would say, when a child or a teenager is with the smartphone all the time, it's like on his own. It's like it would be in the street on his own, without any protection, without any control. So why wouldn't we not accept that a child would stay on his own outside? And why would we accept that he would stay on his room behind a screen and exposed with all over the world? That this is a nonsense when we think about it. So we really have to protect them.
Gabriela Tanzio.
Right. So going back on whether or not today's times might cause anxiety. I mean, sure, you can't be happy about everything, but let's be real. Today is not worse than the Great Depression. I just heard that. Life expectancy was around 63, 65-year-old. People didn't have bathrooms at home. Let's put things in perspective. It's not true that life is worse today than it's been 50, 60 years ago. We have plenty of data to prove that.
Or more anxiety triggering?
Well, of course, we'd rather deal with anxiety than people dying in the grapes of wrath. If you read Steinbeck, you can tell how bad it was. Of course, I'd rather deal with anxiety than starving to death. Now, the situation when it comes to the point I would really like us to make today is, let's listen to the youth. If you ask them, do you think it's a net positive or a net negative for your life, social networks? They'll have different answers when they talk about screens. Screens, they'll say, yes, I have fun, it's games, etc. and so on. When they talk about social media, oh my God, yes. Yeah. Young girls especially will tell you how much despair this brings them.
Absolutely.
So we need to listen to them. And
so you think it's changing humans?
Indeed.
Sure it is. I mean, it's faceless interactions.
And risk-free interactions.
Of course.
And responsibility-free interactions.
Listen, do you like who you are online? I don't like myself online. Sometimes, my life partner, she tells me, I don't recognize you when I read your Twitter feed. And it's true, it's not me. I'm quite a happy person, and I'm just a bit more bitter online.
Indeed.
So, and I do think there's a consensus there. We don't like who we are online. Our interactions are faceless. We don't see the consequences on the face of someone when we tell them something.
Exactly.
Imagine if you have never experienced someone's sadness. Of course, bullying is worse. Now, something's interesting about that. It's about the fear of missing out that kids experience. If you ask them, we'll take social networks away from you, they'll tell you no. If you tell them, everyone's off until you're 15, they're okay with it. What they fear missing out is the experience that their classmates might have. And the experience itself is not what they miss. What they miss is actually the connection they might have with others. So we need to go back to actually in situ, seeing people's faces when we talk to each other. See how you guys drive, same thing.
Ahead of the report, there was a major speech last week on Europe at the Sorbonne University by the French president. Emmanuel Macron said screen time for kids was an EU-wide issue.
Today, for a number of hours every day, we let our children open the door to a jungle. We let them be exposed to risks of cyberbullying, of pornography, of pedophilia. This space is what it is because it's not regulated, nor moderated. We need to get back control over our children and our teenagers' lives and to impose a digital age limit of 15 years old and not earlier throughout Europe.
Take back control. Well, that was the slogan for Brexit, wasn't it? But
I guess it was not the same option about it.
But let me ask you, Bernard Benamou. Emmanuel Macron says an EUwide problem.
Yeah.
What can you do, though, really, at this point in time?
At this point in time, we have to make people conscious, and especially parents, but not only, all citizens, conscious that there is a risk for the next generations. Not only this one, the one in school now, but if the trend is prolonged, that will be a risk for socialization, for all the social links that are completely artificial. We were mentioning Twitter, which is the epitome of the anger management, non-management issue. So at this moment, do we want to have a COVID generation for 20 years? That the kids, we were obliged to be at home.
Right. Isolated but connected the whole time.
Connected in a very, very narrow way. And do we want that to be the new normal for the next generation? I guess not.
Sarah Hayes, is this just a French and European discussion that we're having, or is this conversation happening where you are?
I think it's worldwide. Here's the thing.
Indeed.
I think we're having two conversations at once. I think there's nuance here between content moderation versus access to technology. Do I think we should blanket cut off access to technology? No, because kids are still around it. We still have phones and televisions. Like, you'd have to completely remove those out. However, content, well, any age, but content moderation. Content moderation is what I think is important. That's what I think we need to manage. Education for parents about how technology is used, how it works, what's happening. I think globally we need more of that. Learn what your kids are playing.
Right,
Play
and to enforce
with them.
content moderation, you need regulation then.
Indeed.
You need education. Education. Regulations about educating parents and families. I think that's the core.
Lise Barthélémy, in Montpellier, where you are, this report coming out on Tuesday, is it going to make a splash? Is it going to make people think?
Definitely. Actually, since few years, parents start to think about screens, about the use, and with this huge work of the commissions and with these rules quite clear, it's going to be really helpful for the parents to set a clear regulation to their children. We do have hope, I must say, with this with the rules of that the Commission gave to help parents and families to have I would say normal life with the screens. It's not the question to ban all the screens. It's just to learn to use them wisely, really.
I want to thank you so much, Lise Barthélémy, for being with us from Montpellier. I want to thank Sarah Hayes in Columbus, Gabriel Latanzio, Bernard Benamou. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.